Assalamu alaikum. My name is Naz Qureshi, and thank you for joining us today in honor of the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women. I'd just like to start off by saying that we're meeting here on Treaty 6 ground. As Canadians and those living in Canada, we remind ourselves as well of the calls for justice in the cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Here with me, joining me today is Chaplain Ibrahim Long. Assalamu alaikum, Ibrahim, and thank you for joining us.
Walaikum assalam, Naz. It's very nice to be with you.
It's very nice to see you and speak with you during these crazy COVID times. So I'm just going to dive right in. Would you be kind enough to tell us a little bit about the religious tradition that you belong to?
Yeah, so I am a Sunni Muslim, but even that is a bit of an umbrella term. I'm trying to be cognizant of the fact that for many people within the non-Muslim community, when we say Muslim, there's many different understandings of what that means. So as a Sunni Muslim, even, I have a particular approach that is rooted in the traditional understandings, pre-modern understandings of Islam, but with a personal approach that blends that with modern day understandings of some of the issues that we're facing. And so I like to think that I blend both tradition and our contemporary approaches within my own faith, but also hopefully within my practice.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there aspects within Islam that you find celebrate or support women and womanhood? If so, can you share one with us?
Yeah. One of as a Muslim chaplain, I certainly would be remiss, and as this person is close to my heart, one of my teachers, actually, Dr. Ingrid Madsen, is certainly a modern day scholar whose work within Muslim chaplaincy and very many areas that relate to Islamic law and interreligious discussion has certainly been very highly inspiring in my life. Within the tradition itself, the historical tradition, one thing that I really find very fascinating is actually the role of women as mentioned throughout the Quran. Something that I really find just worth reflecting upon is that a lot of the wisdoms that we identify when reading the Quran are not limited to the words of prophets. We have on many times individuals who share wisdoms who are not themselves prophets. This is, of course, amongst men and women. Even true dreams, these revelatory dreams that's spoken about in our tradition are given to a non-Muslim king, right, and to two prisoners in the story of Yusuf. And so within the Quran, one of the stories that I find very fascinating is the story of Hajar, who is in I want to say in my opinion, but in historical reality, is the founder of Mecca, the very city to which we face 5 times a day. It is she who had the trust in God, who, when her husband Ibrahim, by command of God, left her there to raise their son Ishmael, to found that city. And it was her trust in God that she continued to stay there and to look, running from Safwa and Marwa mountains for some sort of water or something to sustain her and her child. That then God then again provided the miracle of Zamzam water, which every pilgrim, right, when they're going to Mecca, wants to make use of. And so her amount of trust in God, her devotion to her family, to her child, I find to be very inspiring. I mean, we only have a limited time here. There's more here, but if I could just mention one more, is that okay?
Absolutely.
But the story of Miriam, is just so amazing. First of all, her mom is the one that made the vow that what is in my womb, I'm going to dedicate basically, to the masjid, of their time. you know, in her mind, she thought, you know, that she was having a son and that her son would become a priest and to serve the people. You know, in modern day context, she was going to have an imam. You know, she wanted to, right? She wanted to have a son to become an imam for the community, but she ends up having a daughter. And what does Allah mention in the Quran? That the woman is not like the man. And what is her name? Is Miriam. And what does that mean? So one of my teachers, you know, he mentions Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah. He mentions that the name Miriam actually comes from another language. If and I don't want to be misquoting Dr. Omar, but it might have been Syriac or Aramaic that the name Miriam actually comes from, and it actually has a unique meaning to it. And the name means Mir Mary which is actually the dual form of man, which means
Oh,
she's
wow.
like two men. She's not, so her mom thought she's gonna have a man. In fact, she had a woman that was worth two men.
Yes. Subhanallah.
And just her story is just the strength of her faith is just really inspiring. And so I'll leave it there. But so these two great women of God, certainly I find their stories so very inspiring and interesting.
Thank you. I completely agree with your sentiments, especially with Hajj. Not only are we facing Mecca to pray 5 times a day, but the entire Hajj ritual, we're commemorating basically her life and Ibrahim's life. So
Yeah.
it's quite remarkable. Um, Going into our last question here, do you find there are times or situations where there is an abuse of theology for one's underlying interests for their behaviors to the detriment of others, primarily their spouses?
Yeah, this is a good yet unfortunate question that we even have to raise. But one aspect that comes from, you know, being a chaplain is that I've really come to recognize that underneath, like many of the questions that we raise, even to our religious leaders, whether they're related to Islamic law or to theology, they're often really at root an emotional concern that's placed within the religious language. And unfortunately, within our tradition, sometimes people can abuse different understandings. Obviously, the verse that is most um, commonly misappropriated for this is 434. So Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of women. And of course, it seems somewhat ironic, or whatever the case might be, however you wanted to name it, that this particularly difficult verse, which talks about in a marital dispute, how might the husband um, address and try to correct whatever, you know, you want to understand the shoes or the misbehavior of their wife to be. And what's difficult is that at the very end of three key points, it mentions to basically strike them. Now, this particular ayah, this particular verse of the Quran, um, to cite where it could be misappropriated and abused is perhaps too obvious. But to also recognize that there are within the tradition throughout history, people have actually struggled with this. This is not a modern struggle. This is not like, oh, Western Muslims are looking at this and trying to westernize and liberalize, you know, Islam. Like throughout history, there have been people who have struggled with what this particularly means. And without going into all of that, I'll simply say that a good number of scholars are really presenting some good arguments, which really help us to contextualize this ayah to really help us to address how we should act upon it or understand it today. I'll take that to the side and just mention what I can say as a chaplain, which is that we as human beings, within each of us, we have emotions, we have desires, we have wants. And sometimes we use religion as a way to get what we want
Mhm.
at the detriment of the religion. one of the problems in whenever anyone can turn to religion to justify their misbehavior, which unfortunately there are too many evidences of this to cite, that it can make it that much more difficult to get through to them, to help them to realize that what they're doing is wrong, that what they're doing is incorrect and not beloved to God. And so, as a chaplain, one of my approaches in supporting people, helping people when they're dealing with any particular concern is to first of all talk about that emotion that's beneath the question, that's beneath the theology. And hopefully, by addressing that, we can get to some sort of resolution that then leads to something that is also beloved to God.
Yes, that's great. Always trying to interpret through that lens of compassion and mercy of Rahmah. Well, thank you very much, Ibrahim Long. As always, it's been an honor to speak with you and to have you share your thoughts. Thank you and Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.